A group of men ventured into Cyclops Cave on a chilly April evening, seeking adventure, or perhaps just a thrill. But heavy rain turned the cave's stone heart into a trap. One man broke free, scrambled out into the night, and raised the alarm. The other 5 remained stranded in darkness, cold, and fear, until rescue crews mastered the cave's twisted passages and brought them back to life. Cyclops Cave nearly claimed them, but sorrow turned into survival. Cyclops Cave lies in the Appalachian foothills of Western Virginia, a place of quiet forests and rolling ridges. At the surface, it seems harmless, just another opening in limestone rock hidden by brush and trees. Yet beneath its narrow entrance, the cave twists into long corridors, crawlways, and chambers carved by water over thousands of years. What appears from the outside as a shallow cavern is in fact a network of passageways that can confuse, exhaust, and entrap. The geology of this region is typical karst terrain. Rainwater, slightly acidic from contact with the atmosphere and soil, dissolves the soft limestone layer over time. The result is a honeycomb landscape of sinkholes, underground streams, and caves. Cyclops is one of many, but it has a reputation even among locals for being unforgiving. The ceilings dip low, the walls press in tight, and the floor is littered with mud and loose stone. When rainfall is heavy, water channels through the system and creates sudden floods. What is a dry crawl 1 hour can become a rushing siphon the next. By the early 1980s, Cyclops Cave was known among caving groups, but it was not mapped thoroughly, and it carried risks not always appreciated by newcomers. Unlike commercial show caves with railings and lights, wild caves offer no infrastructure and no margin for error. The darkness is absolute. Temperatures underground average in the low 50s, enough to sap body heat steadily from anyone unprepared. Even experienced spelunkers describe long crawls through Cyclops as claustrophobic, an environment where panic must be controlled with discipline. Warnings about cave safety were well established by then. National caving organizations reminded explorers that they should never enter without proper helmets, multiple lights, and a trained group. The old rule of 3 people minimum, 3 light sources per person, was taught to prevent accidents from becoming tragedies. Still, local caves attracted casual adventurers who sometimes underestimated the risks. Cyclops was particularly deceptive. Its entrance seemed approachable, inviting curiosity from hikers and young men eager for a challenge. Once inside, however, its branching passages and low ceilings could disorient quickly. On a dry day, these challenges could be overcome with patience, but on a wet day, the cave could become deadly. Rising water transformed passages into traps with no easy way out. On a rainy April evening, this cave turned from playground to prison. 6 men entered, but only 1 would emerge under his own power. The other 5 would remain inside as the storm outside funneled water into the labyrinth, leaving them cut off, cold, and fighting for survival. The group that gathered at Cyclops Cave that April evening were young men from the local area, familiar with the woods and curious about the limestone openings scattered across Virginia's hillsides. They were not professional cavers, nor did they carry specialized equipment. What they did have was enthusiasm, confidence in their fitness, and the easy daring of youth. The cave's entrance was narrow but manageable, just wide enough for a person to crawl inside on hands and knees. Once through, the passages stretched back in long corridors where helmets scraped against stone ceilings and boots sank into slick mud. To many first-time visitors, the thrill of exploration outweighed the discomfort. That night, as the 6 men prepared to enter, spirits were high. The sky was grey, light rain had been falling, and the ground outside was damp, but no one seemed alarmed. Caves had sheltered people for centuries, and rain at the surface did not always translate to danger below. Their gear was simple: flashlights, casual clothing, perhaps a few helmets. They had no ropes for vertical work, no radios for communication, no emergency provisions. This was meant to be an evening of adventure, not a professional expedition. The mood was relaxed, and there was laughter as they ducked into the mouth of the cave, leaving daylight behind them. Inside, the air was cool and heavy, carrying the smell of damp earth. Their voices echoed faintly as they moved deeper, crawling through narrow sections and standing in slightly larger chambers. Mud clung to their boots, and water trickled down walls where earlier rains had seeped through cracks above. For the first stretch, the challenges were manageable. They joked, pointed their lights at formations, and pressed on. But outside, rain began to fall harder. What had seemed like a passing shower swelled into a steady downpour. Water coursed into sinkholes and fissures across the hillside, funneled underground by the porous limestone. Cyclops Cave, with its narrow passages and low ceilings, began to take on water. The men inside did not yet realize it, but their exit route was slowly disappearing. At first, the men moved through Cyclops Cave with ease. Their flashlights swept across damp stone walls, illuminating narrow corridors that twisted into the earth. They laughed, called to one another, and pressed forward, testing how far they could go. The cave was tight, often forcing them to crawl on their bellies or squeeze sideways through passages barely wide enough for their shoulders. But these challenges carried a thrill. Every bend promised something new, and for young explorers, discomfort was just part of the adventure. They were deep in the cave when the storm outside grew heavier. On the surface, the rain pounded through trees, filled gullies, and drained into the porous ground. Underground, the effect was dramatic. Water trickled faster through cracks in the ceiling and pooled on the floor. Then the trickles became streams. In a cave like Cyclops, rising water moves quickly, filling the lowest passages first. The men inside noticed it when their boots splashed into puddles that had not been there moments earlier. At first, the water seemed like a nuisance, not a threat. They pressed deeper, believing they had time. But as they turned back toward the entrance, they realized conditions had changed. The crawlways that had been open when they entered were now filling with water. The main exit passage narrowed to a half-flooded crawl, water gushing through faster than they could move. To pass through meant submerging in muddy, fast-flowing water with no certainty of reaching air on the other side. Panic stirred. Flashlights reflected off rising pools, and their voices echoed in nervous bursts. One man pushed ahead, fighting through the flooded section. He managed to squeeze out, lungs burning as he burst into the cool air outside. He was the only one who would make it out under his own power. The other 5, caught behind, were trapped. Inside, the situation deteriorated quickly. The water rose steadily, creeping higher against their bodies. They scrambled back from the flooded crawl, deeper into the cave, searching for higher ground. Their flashlights revealed slick mud banks and ledges above the waterline, where they clambered to escape the rising flow. Huddled together, they listened to the roar of water surging through the passage that had once been their exit. The air grew colder. Underground temperatures in Cyclops hover near the low 50s, and soaked clothing drew heat rapidly from their bodies. The men shivered violently, pressed against one another for warmth. Their lights, already dimming, cast weak glows against dripping walls. Every sound was magnified: the hiss of water, the scrape of boots, the labored breathing of fear. They knew rescue would depend on someone outside realizing they were trapped. The man who had escaped had already rushed for help, his voice breaking as he explained to neighbors and eventually authorities that 5 friends were still inside. For the men underground, time slowed to a crawl. Minutes felt like hours as they clung to ledges above the rising water, wondering if rescuers would arrive before exhaustion or cold overcame them. Cyclops Cave had turned from playground to prison in less than an hour. The exit was sealed by flood, and the 5 men were now hostages to the storm. The alarm spread quickly once the lone survivor stumbled out of the cave and called for help. His clothes were drenched. His voice shook as he explained that 5 of his companions were still inside. Local authorities responded immediately, aware that caves in the region could become deadly in heavy rain. Firefighters, sheriff's deputies, and volunteer rescuers rushed to the scene. Within hours, word reached experienced cavers who understood the dangers of Cyclops and offered their assistance. By the time rescuers gathered at the entrance, night had fallen. Rain still poured through the trees, and water continued to surge into the cave system. Flashlights and flood lamps lit the small clearing outside as vehicles and equipment filled the area. Rescuers faced a grim reality. The men were alive inside, but reaching them meant battling the same water that had trapped them. The first attempts to re-enter were cautious. Rescuers crawled into the main passage, only to be forced back by the sheer force of water rushing through the crawlway. It was like trying to swim against a fire hose in total darkness. Even trained cave divers hesitated. Visibility was poor, mud churned in the current, and every second inside risked another life. The only option was to wait until water levels dropped enough to attempt safe passage above ground. Families gathered, clinging to each other for comfort. The survivor recounted the moment he had squeezed through the flooded exit and left his friends behind. He replayed it over and over, convinced he might never see them again. Tension hung heavy in the cold night air. By morning, as rain eased, the water levels inside Cyclops began to recede. Teams equipped with helmets, ropes, and lights prepared for entry. This was no ordinary rescue. Navigating a flooded cave meant crawling through constrictions half filled with water, squeezing sideways, and pushing gear ahead by hand. Rescuers tied safety lines at every bend to ensure they would not become disoriented. Progress was agonizingly slow. Mud clung to boots and gloves, and the sound of rushing water never stopped. But deep inside the cave, shouts suddenly echoed back. Faint at first, then clearer. The men were alive, huddled on ledges above the high water mark, shivering but conscious. The 5 had endured more than a day in darkness and cold. Relief surged through the rescuers, but the hardest work was still ahead, getting them out. Extraction took hours. Rescuers provided warm clothing and reassurance, then carefully guided each man back through the narrow crawlways. Some sections still carried swift water, and ropes were used to help them inch forward. One by one, they squeezed through the flooded passage until daylight appeared. When the first man emerged into the clearing, cheers and tears erupted from family members waiting outside. As each of the others followed, the scene became a mixture of joy and disbelief. Against terrible odds, all 5 had survived. The ordeal lasted nearly 30 hours from the time the men had entered until the last one was brought out. Cyclops Cave had nearly claimed 5 lives, but coordinated rescue efforts and the resilience of the trapped men had turned potential tragedy into a rare story of survival. The successful rescue at Cyclops Cave was met with relief across Virginia and beyond. Newspaper headlines called it a miracle. emphasizing how close the 5 men had come to death in the flooded passages. Families who had prepared themselves for the worst were reunited with their sons, brothers, and friends. The celebration, however, was tempered by recognition of how narrow the escape had been. Caving organizations quickly pointed to the incident as a cautionary tale. The men were not reckless thrill seekers, but neither were they fully prepared for the risks of a wild cave system. They had entered without specialized equipment, without ropes, and without a clear understanding of how quickly rainfall could transform a cave environment. In official reports and later analyses, the key lesson was clear. Even seemingly approachable caves could become deadly under the right conditions. For the caving community, the Cyclops incident became part of a broader conversation about safety and training. Clubs and rescue organizations began to stress flood awareness, teaching cavers to check weather forecasts carefully and to avoid caves during rainy conditions. The National Speleological Society used cases like Cyclops to highlight the importance of preparation. Helmets with mounted lights, backup illumination, ropes for navigation, and emergency planning before any descent underground. The trapped men themselves became reluctant figures in this dialogue. They spoke of their ordeal with humility, describing the cold, the darkness, and the helpless wait for rescue. Their survival had depended not only on the rescuers who reached them, but also on their decision to stay calm, conserve energy, and huddle together for warmth. Those choices, simple as they seemed, likely saved their lives. Local communities remembered the event for years. Cyclops Cave became a symbol of both danger and deliverance. Parents told the story to warn their children away from entering caves without guidance. Teachers in the area even used the incident as an example of how quickly nature could overwhelm human confidence. Unlike many cave incidents, which end with tragedy, Cyclops carried a rare outcome. 5 men went in, 5 men came out. Yet its legacy was not triumph alone. It was a reminder that caves, however inviting, are indifferent to human bravery. Preparedness, discipline, and respect. Respect remain the only safeguards against disaster. Today, Cyclops Cave sits quietly in the Virginia hills, its entrance half hidden by brush, its chambers echoing only with the drip of water. To most passers-by, it is just another hole in the limestone. But for those who know its story, the cave is marked forever by the memory of 5 young men who came within a breath of never returning. What makes Cyclops stand apart from so many cave disasters is not the darkness or the rising flood, but the outcome. Against the odds, the trapped men were brought back to the surface alive. Their rescue was a triumph of courage, persistence, and cooperation. Yet the cave offered no kindness in their ordeal. It stripped them of warmth, light, and certainty, forcing them to confront the absolute indifference of nature. Standing at the mouth of Cyclops Cave now, one hears only the wind in the trees and the trickle of water beneath stone. But the silence carries weight. It reminds us that beneath the surface, beauty lies an unforgiving world, one that punishes overconfidence and rewards only respect. The men survived, but their story remains a warning. In caves, survival is never guaranteed.